Shavua Tov. I trust everyone had a wonderful holiday and a wonderful Shabbat. Who not to vote for in political races? I don't like to go into politics, so I will share some thoughts from the Parsha and will let those politicians whose votes we should not get identify themselves. And not just politicians, also our own behavior. What behaviors are we sometimes guilty of that we should consider offloading and getting rid of? With that introduction, let's take a look at the service of the Yom Kippur, because that is the main topic of the first part of our Parsha. In order for Aharon to come into the Holy of Holies, on Yom Kippur, he has to perform a whole series of rituals. Now, the introduction, though, seems to be not connected to the story of the Avodah on Yom Kippur, the service, at all. It starts off by saying that God spoke to Moses to tell Aaron all of these laws after the death of the two sons of Aaron, B'korvatam lifnei Hashem vayamutu, when they came close to the Lord and they died. Why is that the introduction to the laws of Yom Kippur, to the Yom Kippur service in the temple that Aaron was to perform? The simple reading is that, well, they attempted to come close to God, to perhaps go to the Holy of Holies, and it didn't end well for them. Vayamutu, they died. So if Aaron wishes to avoid the same fate, he's got to do things differently, and here is what he has to do differently. That seems to be the simple explanation. We'll delve into that a little more. Now, in that verse itself, there is also something strange and missing. What was the sin of Nadav and Avihu? It doesn't say. It doesn't say when they brought a strange fire and they died. It just says, B'korvatam lifnei Hashem vayamutu, they came close to the Lord and they died. Now, if I wouldn't know the backstory, I would be completely perplexed by this verse. The two sons of Aaron came close to the Lord. That sounds great. And they died? Why? Well, we know why, but if not, we would not get it from this verse. Why not? Why doesn't the verse reference the strange fire that they brought, as the Torah does elsewhere? Now, one explanation could be what we said at the time, which was that they didn't die as a punishment. They died because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. That was the moment when God was going to send fire from heaven to consume the incense on the altar, to consume the sacrifice on the altar. And they, on their own, chose to bring their own fire at the wrong moment, and they were in the way. That would be the expression, B'korvatam lifnei Hashem, when they came close to God, too close, vayamutu, and they died. Okay, we'll accept that, but we will add another layer to it as we go. But the biggest and most perplexing question about this whole Yom Kippur service is that when you read it, you don't know when this is, because it doesn't say the date at all until the very end. In other words, at the end it says, by the way, this is what you do on the 10th of Tishrei. This is Yom Kippur. This is what you do to achieve forgiveness. Why not put it like all the other holidays in the Torah, where the holiday date is given on such and such and such and such a month? You do X, Y, Z. Do it here too. What's the switch in the order? Tell me the whole ceremony. I didn't even know what we're talking about. And then at the end, oh, this is Yom Kippur. Oh, strange. There's a very sublime message in this to begin with, and that is the difference between a ceremony and sincere worship. When you define the date and then say, this is what you must do on this date, you're basically defining a ceremony. This is the ritual that has to be performed on this date. And I am sure that the high priests would perform it to their utmost, with as much sincerity as they can possibly muster, and the whole people would certainly be greatly inspired. But you're still stressing and emphasizing the ceremonial aspect. But when you start with the actions, with the sacrifices, with the deeds, and then you say that the deeds are what creates the Day of Atonement, then you have a different stress. Then you are stressing the sincerity and the purity of the worship service itself. And the result is going to be a day when God atones and forgives. So there is a subtle difference over there. But let's take this one step further. Because the Gaon of Vilna says something remarkable. And he has a different explanation why the date is only given at the end. Because, says the Vilna Gaon, if Aaron wants to make Yom Kippur any day of the year, as many times as he wishes, he has the right to do so. What is the Torah telling us? That Aaron can come into the Holy of Holies, whenever he desires, on condition that first he perform all of these rituals that we know as the Yom Kippur Avodah, the Yom Kippur service. And the Meshech Chochma, Rabbi Simcha of Devinsk, gives an additional explanation, because the Torah says that in order for Aaron to come into the Holy of Holies, which is normally, we assume, only allowed to the high priest on Yom Kippur, it's the center of the service. So Aaron, it says in the Torah, can come in with the cloud. Be'anan era'eh ala kaporet. I will appear in a cloud on the kaporet, which is the ornate covering of the Holy Ark inside the Holy of Holies. Now Aaron, bizchuto, in his merit, the Bnei Yisrael had ananei kavod, clouds of glory, accompanying them permanently throughout their journey in the desert. So Aaron, says the Meshech Chochma, was in a permanent status of having the cloud, and therefore he was, in a sense, a permanent walking Yom Kippur. So when he wished to enter at any time during the year, he would get the people together, and the whole thing, with the goat for God, and the scapegoat, and the confessionals, and all of that stuff, and then he would be enabled to go into the Holy of Holies. So it comes out, according to this, that there are 3 different levels of permission for different people to go into the Holy of Holies. The first was Moses. Moses could go into the Holy of Holies whenever God called him. It was there that he communed with God. It was there that he got the Torah and the mitzvot, and then he came out with a glowing face, so bright that the people had to cover their eyes, and he had to put a mask on, some sort of a shield, to prevent people from getting blinded by his light. Something that the Italian sculptors mistranslated, and instead of having beams of light, which is what karnei or in the Torah means, they gave him horns, which is karnaim. So that's why you have statues of Moses with horns, based on a mistranslation of karnei or, karan or, of his face beaming with light. So Moses could go in whenever God wished to speak to him, which was pretty much on a daily basis. Then you have Aaron, who could go in whenever he wanted, as long as he performed the entire Yom Kippur style service. And then in future generations, the high priests can only go in on Yom Kippur itself, having performed the Yom Kippur service. So there you have 3 different levels. Let's take a look at the top 2. Moses and Aaron. Moses and Aaron each have a specific job that is the mirror image of each other. Moses' job is basically to be the representative of God. What does that mean? That means that he goes into the Holy of Holies to hear the word of God, and then he goes out to present it to the Israelites. And that perhaps is why his face glowed so much, because he had the appearance of God's ambassador. Aaron, by contrast, was the representative of the people. His job was to first go out to the people and lift them up and sanctify them and unify them and do all of the sacrifices outside with the goats and the confessionals and the forgiveness, and then to represent them to God by going into the Holy of Holies wearing only white garments. So he was the mirror of Moses. Moses was God's representative who had to speak to God and then bring that word to the people. Aaron was the people's representative. He had to elevate the people and then present them, as it were, to God. He needed to go into the Holy of Holies together with the entire Jewish people. And that is what Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, failed to do. The great Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch sees a hint in this in the censers, C-E-N-S-E-R-S, I believe, the utensils with which they brought the incense, that strange fire that cost them their lives. It says, Ish machtato, each one took his own incense burner, incense censer. In other words, they represented not the Jewish people, but they represented Nadav and Avihu, themselves. Now, certainly they were very holy. The Torah says about them, Bikrovaya Kadesh, the ones who are close to me will sanctify me. And Moses says this refers to Nadav and Avihu, who, in a sense, were even holier, says Moses, than you, Aaron, and myself. So they were certainly on a high level, but they didn't bring the people with them. It was just them. Each took his own incense burner. And the same thing may be hinted at in the first verse of our Parsha, Bekor Vatam, when they came close to the Lord and they died. They came close, but no one came close with them. So God says to Aaron, you have to be a different type of a leader. You cannot afford to be holy yourself when the people are not. You must elevate the people with you. If you wish to go in to the Holy of Holies, your job is first to unify and purify the people. All of the sacrifices that happen to prepare them are outside of the Holy of Holies. That is where they bring the goats, that is where they confess, that is where they repent, and that is when Aaron gets the authority to then turn and go into the Holy Holies wearing white garments only and present the case of the Jewish people. In a sense, he goes into the Holy of Holies not by himself, but with the spirit of the entire nation with him. And why does he go in with only white clothing? Doesn't the Kohen have beautiful gold clothing as well? The rabbis give an interesting answer. They say because the prosecution cannot become the defense. What is this referred to? The golden calf was made out of gold, and therefore that's the prosecution. That is the accusation. This is the people that made the golden calf, and Aaron himself personally had been involved with that. And now to go into the Holy of Holies to supplicate for the forgiving of the people wearing gold, reminiscent of the crime, is inappropriate. The prosecution cannot all of a sudden become the defense. It's not that gold itself as a substance doesn't have a place in the Holy of Holies. It certainly does. The Holy Ark itself was coated in gold. But when Aaron comes in to represent the Jewish people to God, there must be nothing in there that is imperfection. And this is where we see what true leadership is. You see, because sometimes a lot of politicians have a tendency to get angry, to attack, to be negative on each other, to criticize, to call names, to try to sabotage. That would not be Aharon HaKohen. Aharon HaKohen's job was to unify and sanctify the people and then present them to God in the best possible light, only wearing white. White is the color of purity, it's the color of forgiveness. When you have a leader who is constantly on the warpath, on the attack, beware. This is not the leadership we should aspire to. As I was studying the beginning of the book of Kings, of Melachim, with my children, we came across the prayer, the dedication of the temple that King Solomon had. And he did two things. First, he praised to God. A long prayer that begging God to keep his presence in this house, that the house should last forever, and that God should always protect and defend and heal his people and sustain them. And then Shlomo, King Solomon, goes and gives a blessing to the people, but the blessing is an exhortation. Walk in the ways of the Lord, follow in his statutes, and then he will keep his presence in this house, and he will bless you and protect you and sustain you. So in other words, King Solomon is doing all of these tasks of Aaron. He's purifying the people and then presenting them to God in their best light, just like Aharon HaKohen. Now, why wasn't King David the one to build the temple? The reason given is because David had to fight wars, and it is true. David had to attack because he had been attacked. David was cursed, and he had to settle accounts. And he was certainly the sweet singer of Israel. Everything that he had to do was absolutely necessary for his survival, and those things that weren't, we read in the book of the prophets that indeed he was criticized and indeed punished for some of those actions. But David, nonetheless, no matter how imperative it was for him to fight all those wars and to be involved in those attacks and those reprisals, that is not the ideal, and therefore it is not David who builds the temple. It is Solomon who has peace and unity. And so we see from here that even in ourselves, sometimes we have a tendency to want to complain, to get angry, to criticize, and it may be justified. It may be extremely justified. Certainly there's a lot of stuff going on in the political world and maybe in our personal lives that is infuriating, if you will. But we have a choice whether to allow that to take over our mind and our hearts and become bitter, or do we follow the lead of Aharon, which is, even though the people may have sinned, to lift them up and to show their best aspect to the Lord, the white garments, and that achieves the result. The more positive we can think about each other and the more positive leadership that we can find, the better the result will be. And hopefully we will achieve the stage when God himself will bring his presence back into our midst in the rebuilt Holy Temple in Jerusalem.